Welcome to the Rebuild Procurement Podcast, the number one procurement podcast in the world, where we dive deep into topics to keep procurement people up to date and ahead of their peers. Subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. We use that one, Alan, like Pocket Cast, all of them. Subscribe, 5 stars. Today on our episode, we're talking about outsourcing and BPO. I'm Tom Finn, bringing 15 years on the client side, procurement, finance, and category management experience in large and small cap orgs.
And I'm Alan Vika, procurement geek on the sell side of our street, and I've assembled a team of superhuman procurement professionals doing managed services at a little company that we call Summit.
This is what happens when we change our times, Alan. Timing gets all mixed up amongst us. We just did a double take for our intro.
I interrupted his intro. So,
I was just going. I was trying not to mess it up.
And then on the second one, I feel like you were waiting for me to interrupt, and I was a good boy. I didn't interrupt.
Exactly what happened.
It's too much caffeine. That's what happens. The caffeine is really kicked in by this hour.
Yeah, but it's all good. So, all right. So today, Alan, we're going into the BPO space. You have a space you know well, as well as outsourcing. So maybe you want to tee this one up.
Yeah, maybe I thought we would start with some definitions because people know the term outsourcing, but have something of a negative connotation with the term, the sense that we're taking jobs from onshore, from North America in our case, and we're shipping them offshore, oftentimes to a low-cost country such as India, the Philippines, Vietnam, even South or Central America. So it's an interesting, I think it's an interesting thing to kind of take that term outsourcing that is thought of as a negative term, and we've kind of masked the outsourcing by burying it and only using the O in the procurement industry. We talk about BPO, which does stand for business process outsourcing. So the outsourcing is still in there, but it's, when you refer to it as BPO, it doesn't sound as harsh. It doesn't.
You're kind of like, first you're like, what did I agree to? Right?
Yeah,
or
that's
what
right.
am I doing here?
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's actually important that the term is rebranded a bit, because BPO does not need to be shipping jobs offshore. It's just pulling resources in from outside, and that can be either onshore or offshore or nearshore. There's a lot of different ways that you can do BPO. As a matter of fact, the latest client that I've started to do work with doesn't even call it BPO. They took the O out. They didn't even want to have any semblance of outsourcing. They call it BPS, Business Process Services. So, it is a service. And that leads me to my second point I want to make, which is I've given a lot of thought, and a lot of people in the procurement industry have given thought to this notion of services, specifically of managed procurement services. And so the first question I usually get from people when they ask me what Summit Procurement does, they say, "Are you a consultant?" And I almost always say to them with a straight face, I hate that word. I can't stand that word.
Did you curse at me? Did you just curse at me?
Exactly.
You put up your fists.
Like, did you use the C word? Yeah. So, but I will. That's right. I will fess up and say, Tom, if you only allowed me to use one simple word to describe what I do, I might be forced to use the word consulting, but it's not what I choose to use. It's not how I choose to identify myself. So what I tend to like to say is, give me 3 words. Summit is a managed procurement services firm, managed procurement services company. Then the next, but see, that leads to too many questions, because then everybody says, "Oh, like they get the what,
Yeah, what are you managing? What services are you managing?
What's this? Yeah, what is procurement?" So I have to say,
baseline. Yeah, I know.
So I like to say managed services. What is managed services, and how does it differ from consulting? And I've put a lot of time into thinking about this. Picture a spectrum. And I'm going to call this spectrum. So spectrum's a line with things on one side and things on the other side. And lots of points in between that lie on that line. I like to call that the managed services spectrum. And at one end of the managed services spectrum, you have what might be called staff augmentation, or in the term that the kids use on the street, staff aug. And think of this as one or two or three resources, a very few number of resources. It could even be a half of a resource. You might want to only use 20 hours a week of some resource to come in and provide a service to your company. That's at one end of the spectrum. Now picture at the other end of the spectrum this notion of outsourcing, of BPO, of BPS. This is big numbers of people. This is 15, 20, 50, 100, in some instances, thousands of people that another service provider might be bringing in to do a certain amount of work inside of a client site. So small on one end, big on the other end. Now, all flavors, all styles, all types lie in between as well. And the way I like to think about this is it might cross over into something that you call BPO once the resources of the service provider are more than 60% of the total number of team members. Then you might say, that's outsourcing. So there is kind of like a dividing line there. And this is a useful way for me to think about kind of managed services and how they lie and what's the difference between staff augmentation and BPO. But then there's still this question out there, what is consulting? Where does consulting fit? Okay, now we got to go all 3D, Tom. Down at the small end, down at the staff aug end of the managed services spectrum, picture another line, another spectrum that actually lies perpendicular to the managed services spectrum. And this is consulting. I like to think of this as the consulting spectrum. So it tends to be 1 to 5 resources, a relatively small team. So it's down at this end. But also it exists for a very short period of time. It's a very defined period of time. And it's more of a project than a program. So you pull a consulting firm in to do a 6-month assessment, a 9-month diagnostic, a 12-month transformation. And very typically, the consulting firm will come in, build a strategy. They may or they may not stick around for implementation. They may hand off implementation to another firm, but it all kind of lives at the smaller end, very typically, of that managed services spectrum. And I claim that it runs perpendicular to it. It's not the same thing. It's a different thing.
Yeah. It's funny when you say the names, staff augmentation, right? To augment, it's kind of usually it's for like you're saying, that quick shift up, down, you're augmenting your staff, right? I need somebody for 6 months. Kind of a lot of folks say it's similar to like temporary hires, like the augmentation up, down, need one person to do something focused, et cetera, et cetera. The business process outsourcing is your business processes they're outsourcing. So you may be outsourcing like entire things that you do, the processes you do.
All of IT, all of call center, all of procurement, or maybe in the case that I was making, more than 60% of your team from procurement. So that's exactly right. Maybe I'll make one more little distinction down at the small end of the managed services spectrum, which is, you mentioned this notion of temp labor. Temp labor versus staff aug, I think, also has a very unique definition. So temp labor is, I need someone to come in, I need a single resource to come in and help me with something. Let me call Kelly Services. Kelly Services is going to send you somebody, and then that person comes in and works with your team as though they're an employee, even though they're a short-term employee. But you, as the client, manage them. You manage those that resource that comes in. Kelly Services goes away and you never hear from them again. Whereas a managed services is just like it sounds. That resource that comes into your organization is going to be managed by the external organization, not by your organization. So you don't have this need to direct their activities day to day. They kind of know what they're doing. It's just add water. That resource is typically, in the case of procurement, is a procurement professional. Comes in and knows how to get stuff done day one.
For sure. All on board with you, Alan.
Okay, good. All right, so let's go now to the other end of the managed services spectrum. Let's this is the topic of this pod is outsourcing, or BPO. Let's call it BPO from here on out. There are two, as I've come to learn through the course of experience, there are two broad categories of BPO that we can talk about. and now I'm going to specifically talk about procurement BPO. There is picture the case where you have a new, young, high growth company that is coming up the growth curve. And it starts with a founder, maybe a few founders, and then the founders add a few IT people, and then the few IT people add some finance people, and the few finance people add some sales people, and then they add. When do they add procurement? Very typically, Tom, they add it too late, and so this high growth company may have now a couple $100 million of spend that some poor person in the back office is just pushing paper around. And
lots of POs, lots of dollars.
That's right. And they're basically just kind of firefighters. They are reactive to requests coming from the organization. And now all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, what? You haven't built a professional procurement organization? That can be such a value game changer for your business. You need to do it. So they'll hire somebody who looks like a chief procurement officer, a head of procurement, who comes in. And initially they're a one-man band and they might manage a small team. Now, in that high growth scenario, you could have them say, it's harder for us to build this procurement team than just for us to outsource it. Let's go out and hire somebody who can bring resources in and manage this for us. So that's one side of BPO in a high growth organization. I would maintain that's probably 20 to 30% of the cases of BPO in the industry today. It's a relatively small minority of the sort of BPO that's happening. And it comes when an organization, a high growth organization, realizes I'd rather buy this than build it. It's a make versus buy decision. Mm-hmm. Now the other segment, the other end of that spectrum is now a very mature business that perhaps its best days are behind it. It is seeing dwindling margins, lower revenues, lower profits. Everything is kind of now they're past the birth and the growth phase. They're in the maturity and the death phase. And oftentimes these companies will bring in an outside CEO, or they'll be bought by private equity, or they'll be acquired by another organization. And the point is, how do we wring more profit out of this? How do we make this company look better than it looks today? So it's a very different scenario than the high growth phase business doing BPO. Oftentimes these are bigger BPOs, so they're in the hundreds and the thousands of FTEs, full-time equivalents, so number of team members. And the name of the game there is, how low can you go? How cheap can you get? Oftentimes on the left side of the spectrum, where it's a high growth company doing BPO, it's all about staying onshore. Whereas where you're trying to wring every dollar out of the cost, it's all about going offshore, and as offshore as you can get, as low cost as you can get. And I would say that second category, kind of the mature company BPO, is 70 to 80% of what happens in the industry today. And I think it's why outsourcing has a negative name, a negative connotation, because just by definition, it's kind of an end of life sort of thing. It's when things aren't going so well. It's you're trying to get everything off of the hot air balloon because you're losing altitude, and we got to get more altitude.
Yeah, for sure. And just with that, like I've have lived experience from oil and gas, right? Where it's like, how much can we just have people like not at this site and just move it off? I was never personally affected, but I watched it happen. It was when I was younger in my career, and I can also, just to the outsourcing side of things, it goes to a lot of just, you make this assumption of steel was made here, now it's made somewhere else. And this was made here and provided for an entire city, now it's made somewhere else. I mean, that is what the visual of outsourcing is someone used to do it close to my house, and now they're doing it far, far away. And
halfway around the globe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And I think oil and gas is a great industry to show this because of the boom and the bust cycles that happen there. When oil is 70 to $100 a barrel, it's a very different world than when it's kind of more at its mean average price, $30 a barrel, right?
Yeah, I think it was 2010, something like that. It hit that was when it skyrocketed to 100. Boom. And then went to 40, 30. There was negative maybe at some point. It was a bad time. And then that did go into all right, bring in a management consultant, right? A consultant for the management that then makes certain decisions for the org to drive down costs. And it's a lot of the timing things that have the bad, I think, make it, just have that perception, because it is when things are going through tough and then people are already in, just to speak to the personal side of it, people are like, how do I feel about this? Or I'm already upset. Now something worse, right?
Right. Yep, that's right. That's another definition that I like to kind of provide people, is this notion of growth BPO versus maturity death BPO. Wring all the costs out of it that you can.
But
Oftentimes
important. It's kept a lot of companies up and running for a certain amount of
alive.
time too.
That's
So yeah,
that's
alive,
exactly
exactly.
that's exactly right. And it's also allowed an organization to look its best for an acquisition where they might be acquired by another industry leader, therefore pulling costs out.
Insert P playbook, right?
That's exactly right. Yes. So, okay. So now that I think that's a good grounding in some definitions. And when we say BPO, that's what we're talking about. We're typically talking about bringing in an external service provider who will make up more than, and this is just my kind of rule of thumb, more than 60% of your total team size. Oftentimes it's, closer to 90% of your total team size, but I would say 60% is probably a generous cutoff.
Yeah, and that last 10 would be like important managers for that area,
Right.
responsible for essentially managing the BPO provider from an internal standpoint.
That's exactly right. That's it. So, okay. So I think that's a good definition. Now, the other thing I think to talk about is these people famously probably have heard the famous dictate that M&A, mergers and acquisition, are hard. It's something like more than 80% of all M&A fails. In other words, you make this assumption ahead of time that if we acquire this business, if we merge this business into ours, we're going to get all these synergies, we're going to get these revenue increases, we're going to be able to change our prospects this way. I think it's 80% failed to live up to those pre-merger expectations in the post-merger environment. I would say the same sort of thing happens with BPO. Success rates are pretty small. We probably have greater than 20% success rates, but I would put it in like the 35, 40% range that actually succeed. And a lot of it is because, again, this late stage BPO is almost just by definition set up so that it can't succeed. There are some instances where it does, but in the early stage, which makes up a much smaller portion of the BPO, the early stage BPO, I think it has a pretty good success rate, again, because you're typically doing some things that increase your chances of success, and you've got a lot of revenue behind it to be able to make it work.
Yeah, I can speak to both sides on those, Alan, from an internal standpoint. Three of them. Well, I'll speak to the two. Just the M&A side of things. I sat through an acquisition. It happened probably like within a year of when I started at the company. And I remember hearing, oh, it takes 3 years for like an M&A deal to really like essentially synergize. Like and you have to have a lot of buy-in and people have to be on board and you have to have your internal folks there. There's a lot of that. And it took about 3 years. I mean, the company that was acquired was like internal to a huge chemical company. And they actually sat within the fence line. They like carved out these sections.
Right.
But it worked well. At the end of the day, they were like, the culture was actually better than they were coming from, but they were very much in that mindset up front that they didn't want to be acquired, all this kind of stuff. But it just took a lot of time. And I think similarly for when you're going into any partnership, it's essentially what it is, right? For an M&A deal, you're buying a company, but you're acquiring the people through that M&A deal. And you got to kind of work with them, help them understand the culture of your company. Has to be a repeat conversation. And very similarly with these, this is when you're going into a partnership with a BPO organization. Yes, you're going to pay them for their time or on a fixed whatever it is, but a fixed contract or meeting certain goals are set up differently. But it is a partnership and it's pretty big.
It is.
So you really have to be ready to invest the time. And I've seen it on late stages. I was talking where a lot of the internal people were already ticked off. They weren't super helpful. They were essentially let go early on. It was very poorly managed, but very commonly managed, right? It was kind of to stop the bleeding. So it wasn't successful in that regard, nor was the company eventually, unfortunately, went under or got divested. But on the uptick side, I've seen it work where companies are brought in earlier, whether it be in sales, certain pieces of operations, where the company, the BPO company or support staff company, whatever it is, they grow with that startup, with that, with
That's
that
right.
company early on. And you have these kind of like bought in together. You grew up together. You were small. Now you're big. A lot of that, that fun ride that just, if you have a friend and he did something interesting with that friend, then you're better friends for it. They kind of go through those battles and they come out of it on the better side. So I have seen, to your point, I could imagine the success rate is better on that uptick if the company's successful. Maybe a lot of that 70%
It
is
helps.
non-successful companies too.
It helps. Yeah.
But versus the back end.
Yeah, and it is you're able to build that sort of tighter partnership on the early stage growth sorts of BPO, just because, think about it, they don't know someone in procurement today. Now
Yeah.
professional procurement comes in and is able to say, I'm here to help you. And you experience that growth together. And you have, because it's a growth company that's doing the BPO, you have a little bit more money to fund it. There is, in the BPO world, a rule of thumb around what happens as you start to ratchet out the costs of BPO. So as you start to really put pressure on the BPO provider to come in cheaper, what happens to them? They start to provide less experienced resources, and the overall experience for the person buying BPO, the company buying BPO, is degraded. So it's almost like you're guaranteeing failure. So, but this is good. I'm glad you kicked us into the second half of this, Tom, which is really what are the determiners of success? And certainly, I love the way you put it. My first key determiner of success in a BPO relationship is this notion of culture and partnership. So the very term that you use by describing it as partnership is what is required. Very typically, the because it's a service provider and it's a buyer of those services, you got this buyer supplier, or even worse, a buyer vendor sort of mindset, right?
Yeah.
That is so antithetical to partnership. It's deadly. As a matter of fact, I always like to describe it as, welcome to your favorite Shakespearean play. Yes, Tom, here, you've got the buyer script. You have to now read the buyer lines, and I'm the vendor. I have to read the vendor lines. And now it says, hit vendor with baseball bat, right? At this point,
Yeah.
beat him down in cost. So that sort of adversarial
Send email to their
relationship.
CEO telling
You suck. Yeah, right. So that typical adversarial relationship is almost built into this notion of buyer versus supplier or buyer versus vendor. It's not, by definition, a partnership from the start. And you need to just think very differently about it. Just the same way, if you hired an employee, I would hope you're not going to have that same sort of mentality toward them like they're a vendor. You're going to look at them as though they're a partner. You're going to look at them as though they're a colleague. And I think for BPO to succeed, you need to have that same mindset of partnership and collegiality. So that's my number one success factor. Now I'm going to hit number two. And I know you and I see eye to eye on this, Tom, because we've talked about it previously. It's this notion of it's really hard for you to outsource something that you've tried to do and you don't quite do it well today. You have to almost get your processes in shape. And then you need to make sure that you have a management team that knows how to manage to those processes so that you're not asking someone to come in and just make it up, to come in and write the playbook for you. You have to have some sense of what you're asking a service provider to come in and do. So you have to have a well-managed procurement process to begin with, or you have to be very open-minded about building a partnership to do that. In the case of a growth company where you may not have everything fully defined, you got to be willing to take the BPO provider as more of a strategic resource that's going to help you to define those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. It's just as if you were to hire a person for a role, they have to give them some guidance. You have to help them along.
Description.
You have to have a JD. You have to check in with them often. You can't just assume they're going to succeed just because you feel like you're paying a pretty penny for it.
That's right.
And yeah, to the point, sometimes you hire a more experienced group, and maybe you got to take a step back and listen to them a little bit more than just telling. So it is that back and forth.
Yep. And then my last kind of the top three success factors, I think the last one that I'd like to highlight is this is a pretty significant lift when it comes to change management. So you have to gird your loins. You have to be ready for it. And the best way to do that is to treat it like a program, not a project. Treat it like a program that you brand, that you communicate broadly and regularly about, that you celebrate your successes. This whole notion of making sure that you drive the change completely through the organization is going to be what defines kind of my third element of success. You can't rush it. You have to give it proper time.
Yeah, and you have to have it's always good to have an executive sponsor on these things too, right?
For sure.
For stuff to go across the
CEO is
organization,
Yep.
if you don't have it, maybe they're just a little bit bought in. They don't mind signing the contract. That's one thing versus like, I think that communication aspect of it, Alan, of like, this is the team that's going to do X, Y, Z, especially earlier on up front, where people be like, oh, thank goodness, right?
Yes.
Jeez,
Yes, that's exactly
we
right.
haven't had that. It came from XYZ company where it was so easy before. Like, thanks for, leveling up here. So yeah, I think that communication is underdone in many orgs because people feel like sometimes, oh, we over communicate. Maybe they assume that. But for those big changes and where there's also going to be, to your point of, I think you called it a program, programs are managed more over time. Projects have like usually short time windows. This one is something where if you're outsourcing you're going to a BPO organization. Let me rephrase myself.
Yeah,
going to a BPO organization for some version of support, then you kind of have to assume it's just like a whole new group of people that need to be onboarded. And then also folks need to know how they're going to be part of the team.
Right on. All right. So I think we've done a good job setting the stage for what BPO is and some definitions around it and some key success factors. I'm going to give a little teaser to our audience that in a future episode, we're going to bring in somebody who's actually run a very successful BPO inside their procurement team. And they're going to talk very specifically about some of these success factors and give some examples of what they did specially to ensure the success that they were able to witness. So that's coming soon to you on a future episode of Rebuild Procurement Podcast.
Starting to dip into the networks.
That's exactly right. So on behalf of your humble hosts here at Rebuild Procurement Podcast, we are Tommy Finn, the guy who puts Finn in finance, and your OG in procurement, Alan Veek, hoping you will make this a powerful and productive week in procurement. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Show me, and you won't hear the word rebuild.